Here is the paraphrased script, maintaining your distinctive narrative style and articulation while slightly altering word order and phrasing. On the night of April 14, 1871, 27 mounted figures circled a veteran's cabin in rural Tennessee. Davidson County Court records mention only that an incident took place before the entire case file vanished from public archives. What sets this siege apart from dozens of similar Reconstruction-era attacks? The man inside that cabin had killed 247 Confederate soldiers during the war, each from distances over 800 yards. For decades, military historians have tried to verify his service record, only to discover most documentation about his unit was lost in the 1873 War Department fire. But 7 letters from Union officers, found in a Virginia estate sale in 1954, confirm one unsettling detail: he never missed. The night riders surrounding his property that spring evening had no idea what they were walking into. Before we continue with what happened in that isolated hollow, if you're watching from Tennessee, Kentucky, or anywhere in the South, let us know in the comments what state you're from. Because what I'm about to share may have happened closer to your hometown than you think. Hit subscribe, because stories like this one don't make the history books, and you'll want to hear how this night unfolded. To understand why 27 men rode through darkness toward one man's home, we need to go back 6 years, to the war's final months. The Cumberland Plateau in 1865 was a landscape of contradictions. Union victory had been declared, but in remote valleys and hollows along the Tennessee-Kentucky border, the war never truly ended. Small communities clung to mountainsides, connected by roads that became rivers of mud each spring. Most families had sent sons to fight, some in blue, others in gray, and the bitterness of those choices poisoned wells and split churches down their center aisles. Nathaniel Hardin returned to this fractured world in late November 1865, arriving on foot. He'd sold his discharge pay to a settler for enough money to buy the plot he'd dreamed of for 4 years. He was 31, born free in Pennsylvania to a mother who'd escaped bondage and a father who worked the iron furnaces. He learned to shoot squirrels at age 7 with a rifle that kicked hard enough to bruise his shoulder purple. By 15, he could hit a playing card at 200 paces. The war refined those skills into something far more lethal. His service record, what little survived, shows he enlisted in the 54th Pennsylvania Infantry in August 1862 but transferred to sharpshooter duty after his company commander saw him drop a Confederate officer from a distance other soldiers swore was impossible. He spent 3 years in a unit that existed in official documents only as Special Detachment, Army of the Cumberland. The men in these units didn't fight in lines. They moved alone or in pairs, reading wind and elevation, learning to slow their heartbeat before squeezing a trigger. Hardin chose his property carefully, 47 acres in a hollow 12 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a wagon track through dense oak and hickory. A creek ran through it year-round, and the land was poor enough that nobody else wanted it. He built his cabin from logs he cut himself, notching them tight and chinking with creek clay mixed with grass. The structure was small, maybe 16 feet square, with a sleeping loft and a stone fireplace he built from river rock. He kept to himself that first winter, appearing in Elkton only twice a month for supplies, flour, salt, coffee, ammunition. The town had perhaps 300 residents, most trying to rebuild what the war had broken. The bank reopened. The church held services again. But underneath those attempts at normalcy ran currents of rage and humiliation that never quite surfaced in daylight. People noticed Hardin, of course a black man who owned property, who carried himself like someone accustomed to authority, who paid in coin, not credit. These things drew attention. But he was unfailingly polite, spoke only when spoken to, and never mentioned his service. The merchants took his money. Conversation stopped when he entered rooms. By spring 1866, he'd cleared 3 acres and planted corn. He built a chicken coop and bought 6 hens from a widow whose husband died at Shiloh. He was building something that looked remarkably like a future. That's when the questions started. A former Confederate lieutenant named Josiah Ketchum had returned to Elkton around the same time as Hardin. Ketchum lost his left arm at Missionary Ridge and walked with a limp from a mini ball that shattered his hip. He came home to find his family's farm sold for tax debt and his mother living in 2 rooms above a dry goods store. The bitterness had curdled into something darker than grief. Ketchum spent his evenings in the back room of Patterson's Tavern with 7 or 8 other veterans, men whose farms had been burned, whose brothers hadn't come home, whose entire world had been turned inside out. They drank whiskey that tasted like kerosene and talked in voices that grew louder as the night wore on. "There's a colored man living up in Shepherd's Hollow," someone mentioned one evening in early March 1866. "Built himself a whole cabin. Got livestock. Where'd he get money for land?" another asked. "Served with the Union," Ketchum said quietly. "I asked around. Pennsylvania Regiment, they say." Sharpshooter. The word hung in the tobacco smoke like an accusation. These men understood what sharpshooters did. They'd all seen bodies in positions that made no sense, killed by shots from tree lines half a mile distant. They'd all felt that particular terror knowing someone was watching through a scope, choosing who would die next. "How many you think he killed?" someone asked. Nobody answered, but the silence was its own response. The first incident happened on a Saturday in mid-April 1866. Hardin had walked to town for supplies, his rifle slung across his back as he always carried it, not threatening, just practical. A man living alone in hill country needed to hunt. He bought flour, coffee, nails, and a new rasp for his tools. He was loading his purchases into a canvas sack when 3 men approached him outside the general store. Ketchum was one. The other 2 were brothers named Vernon and Cecil Tyree, both of whom had served in the 20th Tennessee Infantry. Vernon still wore his Confederate shell jacket, the buttons replaced, but the gray wool unmistakable. "Heard you were a soldier," Ketchum said. His tone was conversational, but something lurked underneath, like ice forming on a pond. "Yes, sir," Hardin replied, not quite meeting his eyes, a habit of survival predating the war. "Kill many of our boys." Hardin adjusted the sack on his shoulder. "I did what I was ordered to do." "Bet you did." Vernon Tyree stepped closer. "Bet you enjoyed it, too. Sitting safe in a tree somewhere, shooting men who couldn't shoot back." "I served my country same as you served yours," Hardin said evenly. "War's over now." "That's where you're wrong," Ketchum said softly. "War ain't over. Won't be for a long time." Hardin walked away without responding. He felt their eyes on his back the entire length of Main Street. When he finally turned onto the wagon track leading to his hollow, his hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the weight of the supplies. 2 weeks later, someone shot his dog. The animal had been sleeping on the porch when the bullet took it through the chest, a clean shot from a distance. Hardin buried the dog behind the cabin and said nothing to anyone, but he started sleeping with his rifle within arm's reach. In early May, he found his cornfield torn up, every seedling pulled and scattered. Boot prints in the soft earth showed at least 4 different men. He replanted, working through the night by moonlight, and built a scarecrow dressed in an old Union jacket. The scarecrow was burning when he returned from checking traps the next morning. Someone had doused it in coal oil and set it ablaze. The jacket burned completely, leaving only a wooden frame and a scorch mark that looked like a grave. That evening, Hardin sat on his porch as darkness gathered in the hollow. Spring peepers sang in the creek bottom. Somewhere, an owl called 3 times. He cleaned his rifle, a .52 caliber Sharps with a scope acquired during the war, its glass ground by a German optician in Cincinnati who understood precision. The weapon could put a bullet through a man's heart at 1,000 yards if the wind was right. He heard them before he saw them, horses moving through the woods, trying to be quiet but betraying themselves with cracking branches and jingling bridles. Hardin stood slowly, moving into the cabin doorway but not inside. He counted sounds, estimating numbers and positions as he'd been trained. They emerged from the tree line just as the last light died. 27 riders, some carrying torches that threw wild shadows across the clearing. Most wore hoods, white fabric crudely sewn with eyeholes that made them look less than human. But Hardin recognized horses, saddles, the way certain men sat their mounts. Ketchum was there, his empty left sleeve pinned to his jacket. The Tyree brothers, others he'd seen in town. They formed a loose circle around the cabin, about 70 yards out, far enough to feel safe from a shotgun, close enough to make their point. "Nathaniel Hardin." Ketchum's voice carried across the clearing. "You've been given warnings. You chose not to heed them. This land doesn't belong to you. This whole valley doesn't belong to your kind. Hardin said nothing. He calculated distances, read wind from torch flames, noted which riders had weapons visible. We're offering one final chance, Ketchum continued. Leave tonight. Walk away from this property, and nobody gets hurt. Stay, and we'll burn you out. Those are your choices. One hooded rider raised a torch higher. Others began to dismount. That's when Hardin spoke, his voice quiet but clear. I count 27 of you. I'm curious how many plan to make it home tonight. The movement stopped. You threatening us? Vernon Tyree called. You're alone, boy. We're 27 strong. I know exactly how many you are, Hardin said. The question is whether you know what I am. He stepped forward slightly, letting them see the rifle, letting them remember what sharpshooters did. First man who takes another step toward this cabin dies before his foot touches ground, Hardin said, his voice calm, almost conversational. Second man dies before the first hits earth. I figure I can drop 8 of you before you scatter. Maybe 10 if you panic and bunch up. Those are military odds, gentlemen. How many want to be in that first 10? The silence broke only with horses shifting nervously. You can't kill all of us, Ketchum said, uncertainty in his voice. Don't need to kill all of you, Hardin replied. Just enough. And understand this, I'll start with the leaders. That means you, Ketchum. You'll be first, then Vernon Tyree, because you killed my dog. After that, I'll work through whoever looks most eager. By my 5th or 6th shot, the rest will be running so hard you'll leave horses behind. One torchbearer, Hardin couldn't see who dropped his torch and moved his horse backward out of the circle. His bluffing, someone said, but the voice lacked conviction. You want to test that? Hardin asked. I served 3 years in a unit specializing in making men like you regret choices. I've ammunition enough to hold off an army. I've a creek for water, jerky for a month. How long do you want to sit out there in the open while I pick you off one by one? The truth was more complicated. He had maybe 40 rounds for the sharps. Once full darkness settled, accurate shooting would be nearly impossible, even with torchlight. But these men didn't know that. They knew stories about Union sharpshooters, impossible shots, men who killed from unbelievable distances. Another rider moved back, then another. This isn't over, Ketchum said, already turning his mount. Didn't figure it was, Hardin replied. But tonight is. Ride out now, and nobody dies. Stay, and at least 8 won't see morning. Your choice. The circle broke. Riders turned horses and melted into darkness, torches bobbing away through trees like marsh lights. Within 5 minutes, the clearing was empty except for 3 abandoned torches guttering in dirt. Hardin stood in the doorway until the last hoofbits faded. Then he went inside, barred the door, and positioned himself at the window with a clear line to the tree line. He didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after. The siege of April 14, 1871, didn't materialize from nowhere. The 5 years between Hardin's first confrontation and that spring night saw slow escalation, a war fought in shadows and whispers, burned fields and dead livestock, warnings on fence posts and bullets from tree lines. But something changed in those years, something that made Hardin's presence not just annoying but intolerable to certain men. He'd survived. More than that, he'd prospered. By 1867, Hardin expanded cultivated land to 12 acres. He built a proper barn, shingled with cedar splits he made himself. His corn yielded well in the hollow's rich bottomland. He started keeping hogs, knowing pork was currency in hill country. Other black families began settling in the region, freed people coming up from Alabama and Georgia, following rumors of land and opportunity. Some sought Hardin's advice, and he gave it freely. In fall 1868, he did something that turned dislike into hatred. He registered to vote. Reconstruction Acts gave black men suffrage, and Hardin walked into Elkton on a bright October morning to put his name in the register. He voted for the Republican candidate for state legislature. His ballot, like thousands across Tennessee, helped elect men committed to protecting freed people's rights. The backlash was immediate and organized. Random harassment became systematic intimidation. The Ku Klux Klan had always operated in the region, but now their activities intensified. Night riders appeared throughout the county, burning schoolhouses where black children studied, whipping men who'd voted, terrorizing communities. They came to Hardin's Hollow 3 times in 1869. Each time, he met them the same way, standing in his doorway with his rifle, calmly explaining the mathematics of violence. Each time they retreated without testing his resolve. But they were learning, adapting. The 4th visit came differently. No torches, no shouting, just 5 men on foot moving through woods in darkness from multiple directions. Hardin heard them anyway. He'd spent too many years listening for sounds of danger. He fired twice, aiming high, letting them know he was aware. They withdrew, but they'd made their point. They were getting smarter. In early 1870, Hardin married. Her name was Ruth Ann Kincaid. She'd come north from Mississippi with her brother's family, fleeing a county where freed people were killed for owning land. She was 24, educated by missionaries, and saw in Hardin something most missed, not just strength, but a stubborn hope the world could be different. They married in a church 12 miles away with 14 people attending. Hardin built an addition to the cabin, 4 rooms instead of 1, with real glass windows. Ruth Ann started a small school, teaching children from scattered black families in the Hollow and surrounding area. 6 students at first, then 9, then 14. The 1-room schoolhouse attached to their cabin became a symbol of everything certain white men in Elkton couldn't tolerate. It wasn't just that black people were being educated, it was that they were building something permanent, suggesting they weren't going anywhere. In March 1871, 3 of Ruth Ann's students were attacked walking home, 2 boys and a girl, ages 9 to 12, beaten badly enough one boy lost vision in his left eye. No arrests were made. The marshal in Elkton claimed no witnesses. Ruth Ann wanted to leave. "We can go north," she told Hardin one night as they lay in darkness, listening to the creek. "Pennsylvania, Ohio. Somewhere you're not looking over your shoulder every minute. This is our land," Hardin said quietly. "We paid for it, built on it. I'm not running because some cowards hide under sheets." "They'll kill you," Ruth Ann said. "They'll kill both of us." "Maybe," Hardin admitted. "But I spent 4 years fighting so people like us could own land, vote, live free. If I run now, what was it all for?" She didn't answer. They both knew there was no good answer, just choices, all bad in different ways. The final provocation came April 12, 1871. Someone burned the schoolroom, not the whole cabin, just the addition where Ruth Ann taught. They'd used coal oil and rags carefully, ensuring the fire didn't spread to living quarters. The message was clear, "We could have killed you, but we're giving one more chance." Hardin and Ruth Ann stood in ashes the next morning, looking at charred books and melted slates, 14 children's primers bought with money they could barely spare, reduced to carbon. "We're leaving," Ruth Ann said. It wasn't a question this time. Hardin nodded slowly. "After I teach them one last lesson." "What lesson?" "That some things have a price." That night, Ruth Ann went to stay with a family 8 miles away, across the ridge. Hardin told her he needed to pack, prepare for the journey north. But he was really preparing for something different. He spent 2 days readying his cabin. He knew they'd come. The burned schoolroom was an ultimatum. His failure to leave would demand response. So he prepared his ground like a military man prepares a battlefield. He cut firing positions into walls, narrow slits allowing him to see out but nearly impossible to shoot through from outside. He positioned water barrels strategically against fire. He stacked ammunition at each firing port, calculating distances and angles. Most importantly, he documented everything in letters, 7 letters, written over those 2 days, sealed in wax, addressed to Union officers he'd served with, a newspaper editor in Philadelphia, a politician in Washington. The letters described what had happened since his return to Tennessee, named names, provided dates. He left them in a metal box buried near the creek, with instructions written on the cabin wall for Ruth Ann to retrieve if he didn't survive. The night of April 14, 1871, was moonless and cold for mid-spring. Hardin sat in his cabin, rifle across his lap, listening to darkness. They came at midnight. 27 riders appeared from the tree line, just as 5 years earlier. But everything else was different. These weren't hooded night riders with torches and bluster, these were military men executing a military operation. They dismounted a quarter-mile away, leaving horses tied. They approached from 4 directions simultaneously, using terrain and darkness for cover. Half carried rifles, others held unlit torches until the signal. Ketchum was there again, but he wasn't leading. The leader was Robert Calhoun, a former Confederate major who'd commanded a regiment at Franklin, losing 73 men in 15 minutes. He'd returned to Tennessee with military precision wired into his bones, and he'd planned this operation for 2 weeks. The strategy was simple: surround the cabin at close range, light torches simultaneously to blind anyone inside, then rush from all 4 sides. If Hardin came out shooting, concentrate fire on the doorway. If he stayed inside, burn him out. Either way, he'd be dead by dawn. What Calhoun hadn't accounted for was Nathaniel Hardin spending 3 years learning to think like his enemies, anticipate movements, understand how military men approached problems. And Hardin had one crucial advantage: he knew exactly how many men were coming and where they'd positioned themselves. He'd seen them scouting his property 3 days earlier, 2 men pretending to hunt but moving in reconnaissance patterns. He'd counted boot prints around his property line and calculated probable approach routes based on terrain and cover. Most importantly, he understood they'd learned from previous failures. They wouldn't bunch up this time, they'd use proper infantry tactics. So he prepared accordingly. The first man to reach the cabin perimeter about 40 yards from the structure was James Murdoch, 36, a farmer who'd lost his eldest son at Gettysburg. He crept forward through darkness, rifle in one hand, unlit torch in the other, when Hardin's first shot took him through the thigh. The bullet didn't kill him, intentional. Hardin aimed low, choosing wounding over killing because a wounded man screams, and screaming creates chaos. Murdoch's cry shattered the planned silence. Men froze, trying to locate the shot's origin. In that confusion, Hardin fired twice more, both shots hitting dirt 2 feet in front of advancing men, close enough to send gravel into their faces. Next one's through bone, Hardin's voice carried from the cabin. Now you've got a choice to make. Calhoun, positioned at the tree line, made a decision. Light torches, he commanded. Rush the cabin. 14 torches flared simultaneously, turning the clearing into a landscape of wild shadows and flickering light. Men began running toward the cabin from 4 directions. Hardin had perhaps 8 seconds before they reached the walls. He used them carefully. His second shot took Vernon Tyree through the right shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The third hit the torch in Cecil Tyree's hand, exploding it and showering him with burning pitch. The fourth shot hit dirt directly in front of 3 men approaching from the east. His fifth, calculated for maximum psychological impact, struck a water barrel Hardin had deliberately positioned 40 yards from his cabin, filled with creek water and sealed tight. The barrel exploded from the bullet's impact, soaking 4 nearest attackers and dousing 2 torches. By now, the assault was faltering. Men who'd been running dove for cover, trying to understand how someone in a dark cabin could hit targets with impossible precision in these conditions. What they couldn't see was Hardin had spent 2 days memorizing terrain, calculating exact positions where torchbearers would create specific shadow patterns, identifying natural shooting lanes where backdrop and angle made targets visible even in darkness. He'd fought this battle in his mind 100 times before they arrived. "You're down 3 men and haven't reached the walls," Hardin called out, his voice steady, almost conversational. "I've 37 rounds left and all night to use them. Calhoun, you're behind the large oak, 70 yards northwest. You think that tree's thick enough to stop a .52 caliber bullet?" Silence. Then Calhoun's voice, tight with fury, "How did you?" "I know exactly where every one of you is," Hardin interrupted. "Man behind the hickory to my left wears his old uniform jacket, I see buttons reflecting torchlight. Man prone behind the fallen log to the south, you're breathing so hard I hear you from here. You all made one critical mistake, you brought torches to a night fight. Every torch is a beacon showing me exactly where you are." Someone, Hardin couldn't tell who, fired at the cabin. The bullet hit logs and sparked. Hardin didn't return fire. He counted shots, tracked who was shooting, calculated ammunition expenditure. One of you just wasted a round on solid oak, Hardin said. You've maybe 30 more shots between all of you, assuming full loads. I've ammunition to outlast you till morning. Come daylight, you'll be exposed in an open field while I'm behind cover. So here's my offer, the only one you'll get. Take your wounded and ride out. Do it now, and I let you leave. Stay, and I start killing instead of wounding. You're bluffing, someone shouted. Hardin's response was a single shot hitting ground 3 inches from Calhoun's boot, spraying dirt against his leg. That wasn't a miss, Hardin said quietly. That was a demonstration. Next one goes through your skull, Calhoun. You've 10 seconds to start moving backward. The silence broke with Murdoch's groaning. He was still on the ground, bleeding, needing medical attention. Get Murdoch, Calhoun finally said. Fall back to the tree line. We're retreating, someone protested. We're regrouping, Calhoun corrected, but his voice lacked conviction. Men moved backward, dragging Murdoch, retrieving Vernon Tyree. Torches retreated like fireflies, bobbing away through darkness. Within 10 minutes, the clearing was empty again. But this time was different. This time, they didn't leave. From inside the cabin, Hardin saw torches gathered at the tree line, about 100 yards distant. They were talking, arguing, probably deciding what to do next. He'd won the first engagement, but he understood military reality. He'd only delayed them. They couldn't leave now, not after being humiliated twice by one man. Pride and rage would force them to try again, and next time they'd be smarter. Hardin reloaded his rifle and checked other weapons, 2 pistols, a shotgun, plus ammunition stacked at each firing port. He'd told them he had 37 rounds left. The truth was closer to 60, but he wanted them to think he was rationing carefully. At the tree line, Calhoun argued with his men. Several wanted to leave, return with more people, burn Hardin out by daylight. Others, particularly the Tyree brothers' cousins, wanted blood now. Wounded pride demanded immediate satisfaction. He can't watch all 4 sides at once, someone pointed out. We rush again, but some create a distraction while others reach the walls. And who volunteers as distraction? Another voice asked. The man's already proved he can hit targets in dark. You want to draw his fire? While they argued, Hardin did something unexpected. He prepared to change tactics. He couldn't hold the cabin indefinitely against 27 determined men. Eventually, they'd overwhelm or burn him out. He needed to make them believe the cost was too high, not just for tonight, but forever. He took one letter he'd written, placed it prominently on the table weighted with a stone. Then he did something seeming like madness. He opened his cabin door. The torches at the tree line stopped moving. Hardin stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand but pointed down, and called across the clearing, Calhoun, you and I need to talk. Silence. Then, talk about what? About what happens when I die, Hardin said. Because we both know that's what this is about. You're not leaving until one of us is dead. So let's discuss consequences. What consequences? You'll be dead. True, Hardin acknowledged. But so will at least 8 of you, probably more. And here's what you haven't considered. I've documented everything. Every attack, every threat, every name. I've written it down in letters already sealed and hidden. If I die tonight, those letters get mailed. They're going to Union officers, newspapers, politicians in Washington very interested in how Reconstruction's enforced. He paused, letting that sink in. You think you can kill me and walk away? You're wrong. Those letters name names. They describe incidents, provide dates and details. Every man here tonight will be identified in a murder conspiracy. The federal government will have to investigate. Unlike the local marshal, federal investigators can't be intimidated or bought off. You're lying, Calhoun said, but uncertainty tinged his voice. The letters are in a metal box buried near my creek, Hardin said. Instructions for finding them are written on my cabin wall. My wife knows to look if I don't return. You can kill me, Calhoun, but you can't silence me. I've already spoken to people you can't touch. This was truth, or close enough. The letters existed. They were hidden. Ruth and had instructions. What Hardin gambled on was something observed during war. Most men, faced with immediate violence versus long-term legal consequences, choose avoiding legal consequences. They tell themselves they're strategic, biding time, waiting for better opportunity. But really, they're looking for an excuse to quit. So here's my proposal, Hardin said. You ride out tonight. You leave me alone. In exchange, those letters stay buried. Nobody gets investigated. Nobody goes to federal prison. You pretend you're honorable men instead of cowards hiding under sheets. I live on my land in peace. Everybody wins. And if we refuse? Calhoun asked. Then we fight until one of us is dead, Hardin said simply. Either way, those letters get mailed. Either I mail them after killing 8 of you, or my wife mails them after you kill me. The only question is how many of you die first. Torches converged, men huddled in conference. Hardin stood on his porch, exposed, gambling they wouldn't shoot during parley, a calculated risk based on their self-image as soldiers, not assassins. Soldiers honored certain codes. The conference lasted perhaps 5 minutes. Then Calhoun stepped forward to the edge of torchlight. You've a week, he said. 7 days to pack up, leave this county. Take your letters, your wife, go back north. Do that, and nobody bothers you. Stay, and we return with 100 men. No talking. Next time, we burn you out and deal with consequences. Hardin expected this counteroffer, a compromise letting Calhoun save face while removing Hardin from the hollow. No, Hardin said. What? I said no. This is my land. I'm not leaving. Then you're a fool. Maybe, Hardin agreed. But I'm a fool who's killed 247 men in combat. A fool who's held off 27 of you twice now. A fool prepared to die on my own property rather than run from men hiding faces in dark. So if that's foolishness, I'll wear it proudly. He raised his rifle slightly, not quite aiming but making the threat clear. This conversation's over. You've 1 minute to start riding out. After that, I start shooting again, and this time I won't aim to wound. For a long moment, nothing moved except torch flames dancing in night wind. Then, one by one, torches retreated. Men mounted horses in distance, hoofbeats faded slowly into darkness. Hardin stood on his porch until silence returned to the hollow. Then he went inside, barred the door, and finally allowed himself to shake. They returned 4 nights later, and this time didn't announce themselves with torches. Hardin woke to smoke smell, not coal oil and pine, something else making his eyes water immediately. He rolled out of bed, already coughing, seeing grey vapor seeping through wall gaps. They'd surrounded the cabin in complete darkness, built small fires upwind fed with wet leaves and green wood to create maximum smoke with minimum light. The plan: smoke him out without giving targets. When he emerged coughing and blind, they'd be waiting, a sound tactic, something military men would devise after learning from failures. Hardin had perhaps 2 minutes before smoke made the cabin uninhabitable. He grabbed his rifle, moved to the door, but didn't open it. Instead, he dropped to the floor where air was slightly clearer and began to think. They expected panic, bursting out coughing and desperate. But panic killed men, and Hardin had long ago learned to control that fear. He crawled to the fireplace, worked quickly clearing ashes, exposing dirt floor beneath. The cabin was built on a slight rise, the chimney's foundation went down perhaps 2 feet. He'd dug it himself, knowing if he could create an air channel, he could buy time. Using hands and a knife, he clawed at dirt, creating a small pit filling slowly with air pulled down the chimney by convection. It wasn't much, just enough for a few clear breaths, but enough to think. Smoke thickened. His eyes streamed, each breath burned. He had maybe 3 minutes before losing consciousness. Outside, they waited in a perimeter, rifles ready, confident he'd emerge soon. Through walls, he heard low voices coordinating positions, leather creaking, metallic clicks of hammers cocking. They were close, perhaps 30 yards out, forming a killing circle around every possible exit. Hardin pressed his face to the pit, taking shallow breaths of clearer air, forcing himself to assess methodically. Smoke entered from the north side, meaning fires were positioned there. They'd need at least 4 men tending fires, keeping them fed with wet material. That left 23 in the perimeter, probably distributed evenly. Standard military doctrine: riflemen at cardinal points, support positions filling gaps. His mind mapped it: 6 men at north, south, east, west, maybe 5 more scattered between. All watching door and windows, waiting for him to stumble out gasping. But there was another option, one costing everything he'd built but might save his life. Hardin crawled to the wall facing the creek, began working on logs. During construction, he'd deliberately left one section slightly loose, not enough to be obvious, but enough that with right pressure, 3 logs could be pushed outward. He'd done this because he'd learned during war, any defensive position needs an escape route. Smoke was a living thing now, a grey monster filling the cabin ceiling to floor. He could no longer see his own hands. Lungs screamed for air, he knew he was out of time. He braced his back against the opposite wall, pushed with his legs, feeling logs shift. Once. Twice. On the third push, they moved outward with a crack impossibly loud in suffocating darkness. What was that? Someone outside, voice sharp with alertness. Cabin settling from the heat, another responded. He's got to come out soon. Hardin pushed again, the gap widened. Smoke poured through the opening, which would help. It would obscure movement, make it harder for them to see clearly. He grabbed his rifle, realized it was slick with condensation from smoke, and made a quick decision. The Sharps was his best weapon, but it needed dry powder and clear sightline, neither available in the next few minutes. He left it, grabbed a pistol instead, checking by touch that powder was still dry. The weapon held 6 shots. Against 27 men, it was nearly useless, but 6 shots could create chaos, and chaos could create opportunity. He squeezed through the gap, pushing into wet grass outside. Smoke followed, a grey cloud spreading across the slope down to the creek. He dropped flat, began crawling inch by inch down the incline. Behind him, someone shouted, "He's coming out!" But they were watching the door. Several rifles discharged, muzzle flashes bright in darkness, bullets slamming into the cabin's front wall. Men yelled, calling to each other, trying to coordinate fire. "Hold your shots." Calhoun's voice cut through chaos. "Wait until you see him." Hardin reached the creek bank, slid into water about 3 feet deep, cold enough to shock breath from his lungs. The current was gentle but steady. He let it carry him downstream, keeping only nose and eyes above water, using overhanging brush for cover. Sounds of confusion continued behind him. Someone noticed the gap in the wall, shouted about it. Torches were lit now, he saw glow reflecting off water. They searched the perimeter, trying to understand how their quarry escaped. Hardin let current take him perhaps 200 yards downstream before pulling himself out behind a massive fallen sycamore. He was soaked, shivering violently, lungs still burning from smoke. But he was alive and free of the killing circle. From this distance, he saw his cabin clearly. The smoke fires had done their work too well, dry oak logs caught, flames climbing walls. The structure he'd built with his own hands, every log cut, notched, fitted with precision, was being consumed. 27 men stood around the fire, some still holding rifles, others lowering them as they realized their target had escaped. Hardin saw Calhoun pointing, directing men to search creek, woods, anywhere he might have fled. They were spreading out, which meant they were vulnerable. For 5 years, Hardin had endured. He'd been patient, diplomatic, tried every legal avenue to simply be left alone. He'd offered compromises, shown restraint even when it burned like acid. He'd been the reasonable one, the civilized one, the man following law while they hid behind sheets and broke every principle they claimed to defend. Now his home burned. The school where Ruth and taught children to read was ash. The corn he'd planted, the barn he'd built, the future he'd imagined, all reduced to carbon and memory. Hardin checked his pistol. 6 shots. Not enough to fight, but enough to make a point echoing through this county for years. He moved through woods, circling wide around the burning cabin, using firelight to navigate while staying beyond its reach. Men spread out now, searching in pairs, calling to each other. Voices carried in night air, giving him positions. 2 men moved along the creek, searching banks. Hardin crouched behind a limestone outcrop, watched them pass within 15 feet, their torch illuminating water where he'd hidden minutes before. They moved on. He continued his circle. His target was Calhoun, not to kill. Hardin wasn't a murderer. Even now, with everything burning, he held to certain lines. But Calhoun needed to understand this victory was hollow, that driving Hardin out came with a cost lasting longer than one night's triumph. He found position on a small rise overlooking the clearing. The cabin was fully engulfed, flames reaching 30 feet into air, sparks spiraling into darkness like malevolent stars. Heat was so intense he felt it from 100 yards away. Calhoun stood near the cabin's front, directing search, occasionally shouting orders. He'd removed his hood, most had, confident their work was nearly done. In firelight, Hardin saw his face clearly, satisfied, vindicated, already composing the story he'd tell. Hardin raised his pistol, steadied it against a tree, aimed carefully not at Calhoun's head or chest, but at his hat, a broad-brimmed felt hat sitting squarely. The shot echoed across the hollow like a thunderclap. Calhoun's hat flew off his head, the bullet passing so close he felt wind of its passage. He dropped to ground, shouting. Chaos erupted again. Men dove for cover, rifles swinging toward tree line, torches doused. In confusion, Hardin fired twice more, both shots hitting dirt 5 feet in front of nearest men, close enough to spray them with debris. Calhoun. Hardin's voice carried across clearing, amplified by rage and smoke-damaged vocal cords. You wanted to know if I could hit a target at night. Now you know. That was 3 shots. And I missed every one on purpose. Next man who moves gets a bullet through his spine. Complete silence. Even the crackling of burning cabin seemed to quiet. You've won, Hardin continued, voice echoing off ridge walls. I'm leaving. You'll never see me in this county again. But understand something, all of you. You didn't drive me out because you were stronger, braver, or better. You drove me out because there were 27 of you and 1 of me. That's not courage. That's arithmetic. He paused, watching them frozen in firelight. I'm taking my wife, going north. But before I go, know I've documented everything. Every attack, every threat, every name. Those documents are already mailed, heading to federal authorities with jurisdiction over this conspiracy. Some of you will go to prison. Not all you'll sell out friends to save yourselves, but enough will face consequences that the rest spend years looking over shoulders. Calhoun found his voice. You're bluffing. Am I? Hardin's laugh was harsh, damaged by smoke. Your name's first on the list, Robert. Right above Vernon Tyree, James Murdoch, every man who participated. You think I didn't recognize horses, voices? You think I didn't memorize every detail as I was trained to memorize targets? He fired his 4th shot, taking a branch off a tree directly above where 5 men crouched. The branch crashed down among them, causing more scrambling. I've 2 shots left. I could kill 2 of you. Maybe I should, maybe the world's better with 2 fewer cowards. But I won't, because unlike you, I'm not a murderer. I only kill when law says it's legal, during war, or defending my property. The burning cabin collapsed with a roar, sending a column of sparks lighting the entire hollow. In that distraction moment, Hardin moved, slipping from his position, circling back toward the path to Ruth Ann. Go home, he shouted one final time. Tell yourselves you won. Celebrate victory over 1 man and his wife. But know this, every time you hear a branch crack in woods, every time you see movement in peripheral vision, you'll wonder if it's me. You'll wonder if I came back. You'll spend rest of your lives wondering if the next shot will be the one that isn't a warning. He disappeared into darkness, leaving them standing around burning ruins, rifles pointing at shadows, fear eating at their triumph certainty. Hardin reached the Kincaid farm at dawn, moving through woods memorized during his time in the hollow. Ruth Ann was already awake. She'd seen glow on the horizon and knew what it meant. She met him at the property's edge, took one look at his soot-blackened face and smoke-damaged eyes, and understood the life they'd tried to build was over. They didn't speak about it. The burning cabin had articulated everything. Instead, they gathered what little they could carry and began walking north. But before leaving, Hardin dug up the metal box buried near his creek. The letters inside were intact, sealed with wax, addressed to 7 recipients. He carried that box 12 miles to the nearest proper post office, not Elkton, where the postmaster was cousin to half the men who'd burned his home, but a larger settlement across the county line. He mailed all 7 letters on April 20, 1871. The postal clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, glanced at addresses: Union Army headquarters in Washington, 3 Republican congressmen, a Philadelphia newspaper editor, 2 federal marshals, and asked no questions. "These going somewhere important?" he asked, more from professional curiosity than suspicion. "Yes," Hardin replied. "They're going to make some people very unhappy." The investigation that followed was one of 17 launched across the South in 1871 under the Enforcement Acts, legislation designed specifically to combat the Ku Klux Klan and similar organizations. But unlike most investigations foundering on local resistance and lack of evidence, the Tennessee case had something unique: a documented timeline created by a trained military observer, corroborated by physical evidence, witnessed by enough people that the conspiracy couldn't be denied. First arrests came June 1871. Federal marshals accompanied by Army troops arrived in Elkton with warrants for 14 men. They'd expected resistance, possibly violence, but found a town already fracturing under fear's weight. The men Hardin warned about, ones who'd think selling out friends might save them, had already started talking. Within a week, 3 participants provided detailed testimony for reduced charges, confirming everything in Hardin's letters: dates, locations, participants, conversations. The federal prosecutor had more evidence than he'd dared hope for. Trials began September 1871 in federal court in Nashville, far enough from Elkton that local intimidation couldn't corrupt the jury pool. Proceedings lasted 6 weeks, revealing not just attacks on Hardin but a broader pattern of terror affecting the entire region: black families driven from homes, voters whipped for casting Republican ballots, teachers beaten for educating black children. The Hardin case became the prosecution's centerpiece, exposing systematic violence. Robert Calhoun received 7 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Sentenced October 14, 1871, the judge's statement was scathing: "You claimed to defend Southern honor and civilization. Yet you attacked a veteran at night, destroyed his property, sought to murder him for the crime of owning land. History will judge which of you better represented civilization." Vernon Tyree got 5 years for assault and conspiracy. His brother Cecil, who provided damning testimony against others, received a suspended sentence and lifelong contempt from former friends. James Murdoch, the man Hardin shot in the leg during the April siege, received 3 years. During trial, doctors testified about the wound, a through-and-through thigh shot deliberately missing the femoral artery. "If he'd wanted to kill you," the prosecutor noted, "you'd be dead. The fact you're alive is evidence of his restraint, not your innocence." 5 other men received sentences ranging from 2 to 4 years. The convictions sent shockwaves through Tennessee's night rider community. For the first time, there were actual consequences for attacking black citizens, penalties that couldn't be negotiated away through local connections or threats. But 7 convictions out of 27 attackers meant 20 men walked free. Some fled before arrest. Others had alibi witnesses, friends and family willing to lie under oath. 3 were acquitted after juries deadlocked on whether hooded attackers could be positively identified. Josiah Ketchum was among those never charged. His participation ended after the first confrontation in 1866. While Hardin's letters mentioned him by name, insufficient evidence existed to prosecute. He remained in Elkton, watching from sidelines as former comrades went to prison, his empty left sleeve a reminder of one war while another was adjudicated in federal court. Local sentiment split sharply. Some families felt prosecutions justified, violence was violence regardless of target. Others saw convictions as Northern oppression, more evidence reconstruction punished the South for losing the war. Churches split over the issue, businesses serving both camps navigated impossible social terrain. The property in Shepherd's Hollow remained abandoned. Some suggested selling it to pay Hardin's legal fees, though he'd never requested compensation. Others wanted to burn even the foundation, erasing any trace of his presence. In the end, nobody touched it. Charred ruins stood like an accusation, The hollow acquired a reputation for bringing bad luck to anyone lingering too long. County tax records show the property sold in 1875 to a Chattanooga timber company. They logged the hollow over 2 months in 1876, removing every tree larger than 8 inches in diameter, leaving stumps, erosion, a creek running muddy for years. When timber played out, they abandoned the land. It eventually reverted to the state for unpaid taxes. Meanwhile, Nathaniel and Ruth and Hardin settled in Philadelphia, choosing a city large enough that one black veteran could disappear into population. The city's black community in 1871 numbered perhaps 20,000, including many veterans and families. Here, at least, Hardin wasn't exceptional for having fought in the war. Nearly every black man his age had served. He found work as a carpenter. His skills, precision joinery, careful measurements, obsessive attention to detail made him valuable. Within a year, he worked for a furniture maker supplying wealthy households across the city. Pieces he built were noted for tight fits and clean lines, each joint cut with the same patience once applied to calculating wind drift and bullet drop. Ruth resumed teaching, this time in a proper school with a building, books, and other teachers. She had 14 students the first year, 23 the second. Some were children of veterans like themselves, others recently arrived from the South, families following rumors of better opportunities in northern cities. They rented rooms in a South Street boarding house, close enough to the Schuylkill River that Nathaniel could hear water moving at night. It wasn't the same as the Tennessee Creek, broader, muddier, carrying industrial waste of a growing city. But there was comfort in the sound, water flowing, time passing, life continuing despite everything. They didn't talk much about Tennessee. Memories were too fresh, painful, entangled with rage, having nowhere useful to go. But sometimes late at night, Ruth would wake to find Nathaniel by the window, looking out at Philadelphia streets, and she knew he was seeing something else, a hollow in Tennessee, a cabin built with his own hands, a future burned to ash. "Do you regret it?" she asked him once in 1873, 2 years after they'd fled north. "Fighting instead of leaving?" Nathaniel was quiet a long time. "I regret it was necessary," he finally said. "I regret my war service wasn't enough to earn the right to live peacefully. I regret those men valued pride more than justice, law, or basic human decency. But do I regret fighting? No. Some things are worth defending, even if you lose them in the end. That land was mine, paid for fairly, built on honestly. If I'd run the first time they threatened, I'd have spent my life wondering if I was a coward. At least now I know I fought for what was mine." "And the men who went to prison?" Ruth asked. "Do you feel justice was served?" 7 out of 27, Nathaniel said. "That's not justice. That's arithmetic. But it's more than most black men get when white men attack them. I suppose I should be grateful for that much." The bitterness in his voice was something new, or perhaps just something he'd finally allowed her to hear. The war had taught him to kill. Tennessee taught him that all the killing in the world wouldn't earn him equality in the eyes of men who'd decided his skin marked him inferior. Their first child was born 1874, a daughter named Grace. She grew up hearing only fragments of her father's history, mentions of the war, carefully edited stories about Tennessee life, nothing about smoke-filled cabins or night riders circling in darkness. Nathaniel wanted her free of that weight, unburdened by knowledge of what hatred could drive men to do. 2 more children followed, born 1877 and 1880. The family moved to a proper house in 1879, a narrow 3-story in South Philadelphia with a small yard where Ruth grew vegetables. Nathaniel built furniture for each room, beds, tables, chairs, each piece solid enough to last generations. He never touched a rifle again. Friends occasionally invited him hunting, knowing his war reputation, but he always declined. Whatever relationship he'd had with firearms died in that Tennessee hollow, burned with everything else. In 1883, a letter arrived from Tennessee, from a Nashville lawyer informing Hardin that Josiah Ketchum had died of pneumonia at 49. The letter was brief, businesslike. Ketchum's will left instructions that certain items be returned to Hardin if located. The items arrived 3 weeks later in a wooden crate. Inside was Hardin's Sharps rifle, the one left in the cabin when he fled. Someone had pulled it from ruins, cleaned it, oiled it, stored it carefully. With it was a letter in Ketchum's handwriting, written shortly before death. Mr. Harden, I did not participate in the final attacks on your property, though I know you have no reason to believe that. I did not stop them either, which makes me complicit differently. I have spent 12 years thinking about that night, about choices made, about pride and rage's price. I cannot undo what was done. I cannot restore what you lost. But I wanted you to have this weapon returned because it represents something about you I should have recognized sooner: your right to defend yourself, own property, live as a free man in a country you fought for. I am dying now, facing judgment possibly more honest than anything men deliver. I wanted you to know that at least one of us understood too late that we were the ones wrong. Josiah Ketchum. Harden read the letter 3 times, then showed it to Ruth Ann. They sat together in their Philadelphia parlor, examining the rifle once the line between survival and death. It was still in excellent condition, though Ketchum's care couldn't erase water damage from that night in the creek or memories embedded in every machined part. What will you do with it? Ruth Ann asked. I don't know, Harden admitted. Sell it, maybe. Or keep it as a reminder that even enemies can have clarity moments, that hate isn't permanent in every heart, that some men at least recognize mistakes before too late. The rifle went into their attic, wrapped in oilcloth, stored in a trunk with his discharge papers and trial newspapers. It remained there the rest of Harden's life, untouched but preserved, a piece of history his children would discover only after his death. Harden lived until 1904, dying at 70 from pneumonia complications. Smoke damage to his lungs from that April 1871 night never fully healed. His breathing was compromised 33 years. Ruth Ann outlived him by 19 years, remaining active in Philadelphia's black community, teaching until 68. In her final interview, given to a black Philadelphia newspaper in 1922, she was asked about the Tennessee years. By then, enough time had passed she could speak with distance, though certain details still brought tears. People asked if my husband was bitter, she said. If he spent his life angry about what was taken. The truth is more complicated. He was angry, yes, but also proud. Proud he fought back when fighting seemed hopeless. Proud he made them afraid, even if briefly. Proud some went to prison for what they did. She paused, gathering thoughts. What happened in that hollow wasn't about one man or one piece of land. It was about whether this country would honor promises to people who fought for it, whether service and sacrifice meant anything, or whether skin color would always matter more. My husband proved at least one black veteran wouldn't be driven off without a fight. That mattered to him. It should matter to all of us. The interviewer asked if she'd ever returned to Tennessee. Never, Ruth Ann said firmly. There was nothing left. The land was logged, abandoned. The cabin was ash. People who helped us were scattered or dead. Tennessee took our future. Why return to a grave of something loved? Then her expression softened slightly. Though I heard the hollow where we lived acquired a reputation. People said it was haunted by a black soldier's ghost who refused to run. They said you could hear rifle shots on spring nights, see smoke where no fires burned. Nonsense, of course. Superstition. But I liked knowing the place remembered what happened there, even if only in stories. The hollow still exists, now part of a state conservation area established in the late 1960s. Hikers occasionally pass through, following trails winding through second-growth forest. Sometimes they find the old foundation, just a few stone courses slowly consumed by earth and roots. Most have no idea what they're looking at. There's no historical marker, no sign explaining what happened in Shepherd's Hollow those April nights in 1866 and 1871. Official records scatter across archives, court documents in Nashville, military records in Washington, newspaper accounts in Philadelphia and Tennessee. Assembling the full story requires research across multiple states and decades of documentation. Harden's letters became historical artifacts. Reconstruction scholars cite them as rare first-hand accounts of Klan violence, unusual for detail and author's military precision. 3 letters are in the Library of Congress, 2 more discovered in a 1954 Virginia estate sale, tucked inside a book about Civil War marksmanship. The final two have never been recovered, possibly lost or deliberately destroyed. What do you think of Nathaniel Harden's stand? Would you have fought for land rightfully purchased? Or left before violence in an era where legal protection meant little and federal authority was distant? Was his resistance heroic or simply pragmatic survival? Leave thoughts in comments below. If you found this story powerful, hit subscribe and the notification bell. We bring forgotten chapters of American history that don't make textbooks, stories of courage and resistance deserving remembrance. Share this with someone appreciating tales of people who refused to be erased from land they'd earned. And remember, history isn't just what's written in official records. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones deliberately buried, the ones surviving only because someone refused to stay silent.